Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess. You are in my book playlist, and we are going through the pages of the book titled The Book of Life by Upton Sinclair, published by the Payne Book Company in 1921. It is in the public domain. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And to our Fortune community, welcome back. Also, if this is the first time you're coming onto this video and onto this particular chapter and would like to get caught up, please do go to the book playlist and you can get this book in its entirety. And if you've been listening along and just want to jump into the next section, please do go to the description and click on the timestamp. Otherwise, stay a spell here with me as I give you my narrator's comments on the previous chapters. In chapters 2 and 3, the nature of faith and the use of reason. And before I get into that, I love to share that I love these old books, like I like to read other materials that I can't wait to bring to the channel, because there is an underlying theme to me in my heart that no matter what epoch, what era, there is something about human nature. And yes, we move on in technology and we begin to understand more through science, and fashion changes and this and that. But you know what? There is still that one aspect that drives us, and that spark. And for each one of us to find what that spark is for each one of us individually is, I believe, the quest through the different fields of information that we seek, whether it's through philosophy, science, or religion, or nature. You know, it's very interesting. I feel that it would be a grave neglect for us to move on without tapping into these old wisdom, these old thoughts, these experiences and observations that the human race has documented along the way from different sects, from different religions, from different philosophies, from different scientists. I personally see value in that, and I really, really love it. And to be able to kind of somewhere make that connection. And as I move forward in my time, in present, to kind of have this feel that there is a sense of eternity as the race just continues moving forward. Anyway, I want to share with you what I thought was pretty interesting when the author talked about that old law that they had in the state of Delaware, that they would be thrown in jail for working on a Sunday. And as I've mentioned before, I have been in politics. I was the mayor of our city here in Lake Helen, Florida, and I would encourage anyone to participate in their local government, whether as a commissioner or a mayor, or to sit on one of the boards, whether it's a historical board or a development board. You'd really learn a lot, but you'd find out that it's you, we, the people, that are the ones responsible for the laws that have come before us and the laws that will come after us. I mean, here in our local city, we have codes, and then there's regulations, and then there's statutes. And as a nation, we have our federal laws that generally kind of cover the entire country. So it's kind of really interesting that every state, through constitutional law, is allowed to create and enforce additional laws for their own state that might be specific to them. And in that sense, each state is considered sovereign and has the power to create their own laws as is needed. So keep that in mind when you're deciding to move from one state to another. Check out those local regulations, those local statutes. You might be pleasantly surprised. So I did go to this particular website. I will put the link in the description because I wanted to find out about that particular code. And this is what I found out. Delaware's early Sunday laws were strict but typical of their time. The 1852 Delaware Code prohibited the performance of any worldly employment, labor, or business on the Sabbath day. This article was written in 2012, and it stated that currently in Delaware, besides the ban on horse racing on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, liquor can only be sold on Sundays between noon and 8 p.m. Hunting is prohibited on Sunday, and among other things, adult establishments must be closed. There you have it, a small piece of trivia, yet it allows us to think a lot of things like, how long has it been since we've even addressed that? And also maybe even think a little bit further, why the work on Sundays? And this need, is it the hungry need to stay working, or the realization that it's a choice? People that want to work will work, and people that don't won't. And do we need a law to say that we should not be working on Sunday? And perhaps, are there any laws in your local city that may need to be addressed or removed from the books? So that might be something to look at. Either way, that was something I wanted to share with you, which will segue right into the next chapter, titled The Origin of Morality. Compares the ways of nature with human morality and tries to show how the latter came to be. 70 years ago, Charles Darwin published his book, The Origin of Species, in which he defied the theological dogma of his time by the shocking idea that life had evolved by many stages of progress from the diatom to man. This, of course, did not conform to the story of the Garden of Eden, and so Darwinism was fought as an invention of the devil. And in the interior of America, there are numerous sectarian colleges where the dread term evolution is spoken in awed whispers. Only the other day I read in my newspaper the triumphant proclamation of some clergyman that Darwinism had been overthrown. This reverend gentleman had got mixed up because some biologists were disputing some detail of the method by which the evolution of species had been brought about. Do species change by the gradual elimination of the unfit? Or do they change by sudden leaps, the mutation theory of De Vries? Are acquired powers transmitted to posterity, or is the germplasm unaffected by its environment? Concerning such questions, the scientists debate. But the fact that life has evolved in an ordered series from the lower forms to the higher, and that each individual reproduces in embryo and in infancy the history of this long process, these facts are now the basis of all modern thinking, and as generally accepted as the rotation of the earth. You may study this process of evolution from the outside, in the multitude of forms which it has assumed and in their reactions one to another, or you may study it from the inside in your own soul, the emotions which accompany it, the impulse or craving which impels it, the élan vital, as it is called by the French philosopher Bergson. The Christians call it love, and Nietzsche, who hated Christianity, called it the will to power, and persuaded himself that it was the opposite of love. You will find in the essays of Professor Huxley one entitled Evolution and Ethics, in which he sets forth the complete unmorality of nature and declares that there is no way by which what mankind knows as morality can have originated in the process of nature or can be reconciled to natural law. This statement, coming from a leading agnostic, was welcome to the theologians. But when I first read the essay as a student of 16, it seemed to me narrow. I thought I saw a standpoint from which the contradiction disappeared. The difference is merely the difference between a lower and a higher stage of mental development. The animal loves and seeks by instinct to preserve the life which it knows, that is to say, its own life and the life of its young. The wolf knows nothing about the feelings of a deer, but man, in his savage state, develops reasoning powers enough to realize that there are others like himself, the members of his own tribe, and he makes for himself taboos, which forbid him to kill and eat the members of that tribe. At the present time, humanity has developed its reason and imaginative sympathy to include in the tribe 100 or 200 million people, while to those outside the tribe it still preserves the attitude of the wolf. How came it that a mind so acute as Huxley's went so far astray on the question of the evolution of morality? The answer is that this was the factory age in England, and the great scientist, a rebel in theological matters, was in economics a child of his time. We find him using the formulas of bourgeois biology to ridicule Henry George and his plea for the freeing of the land. Competition is the life of trade, ran the 19th century slogan, and competition was the god of 19th century biology. Tennyson summed it up in the phrase, "Nature red in tooth and claw with ravin," and this was found convenient by Manchester manufacturers who wished to shut little children up for 14 hours a day in cotton mills, and to harness women to drag cars in the coal mines, and to be told by the learned men of their colleges and the holy men of their churches that this was the survival of the fittest. It was nature's way of securing the advancement of the race. But now we are preparing for an era of cooperation, and it occurs to our men of science to go back to nature and find out what really are her ways. If you will read Kropotkin's Mutual Aid as a Factor in Evolution, you will find a complete refutation of the old bourgeois biology and a view of nature which reveals in it the germs of human morality. Kropotkin points out that everywhere throughout nature it is the social and not the solitary animals which are the most numerous and most successful. There are many millions of ants and bees for every hawk or eagle, and certainly in the state of nature there were thousands of deer for every lion or tiger that preyed upon them. And all these social creatures have their ways of being, which it requires no stress of the imagination to compare with the tribal customs and the moral codes of mankind. The different animals prey upon one another, but they do not prey upon their own species, except in a few rare cases. The only beast that makes a regular practice of exploiting his own kind is man. By hundreds of interesting illustrations, Kropotkin shows that mutual aid and mutual self-protection are the means whereby the higher forms of being have been evolved. Insects and birds and fish, nearly all the herbivores and mammals, and even a great many of the carnivores, help one another and protect one another. The chattering monkeys in the treetops drove out the saber-toothed tiger from the grove because there were so many of them, and when they saw him, they all set up a shriek and clamor which deafened and confused him. And when by these monkeys developed an opposed thumb, and broke off a branch of a tree for a club, and fastened a sharp stone on the end of it for an axe, and fell upon the saber-toothed tiger and exterminated him, they did it because they had learned solidarity, even as the workers of the world are today learning solidarity in the face of the beast of capitalism. Man has survived by the cunning of his brain, we are told, and that is true. But first, among the product of that cunning brain has been the knowledge that by himself he is the most helpless and pitiful of creatures. While standing together and forming societies and developing moralities, he is master of the world. He has not yet learned that lesson entirely. He has learned it only for his own nation. Therefore, he takes the highest skill of his hand and the subtlest wit of his brain, and uses them to manufacture poison gases. At the present hour, he is painfully realizing that his poison formulas all become known to the tribes whom he calls his enemies, and so it is his own destruction he is engaged in contriving. In other words, Man has come to a time when his mechanical skill, his mastery over the forces of nature, has developed more rapidly than his moral sense and his imaginative sympathy. His ability to destroy life has become dangerously greater than his desire to preserve it. So he confronts the fair face of nature as an insane creature, wrecking not merely everything that he himself has built up, but everything that nature has built in the ages before him. He is striving now with infinite agony to make this fact real to himself and to mend his evil ways. And the first step in that process is to root out from his mind the devil's doctrine, which in his blindness and greed he has himself implanted, that there is any way for him to find real happiness or to make any worthwhile progress on this earth by the method of inflicting misery and torment upon his fellow men. End of chapter 4. Stay right here with me as I turn the page and head over to chapter 5. Hit that like button. Chapter 5. Nature and Man. Attempts to show how man has taken control of nature and is carrying on her processes and improving upon them. If the argument of the preceding chapter is sound, human morality is not a fixed and eternal set of laws, but is, like everything else in the world, a product of natural evolution. We can trace the history of it, just as we trace the story of the rocks. It is not a mysterious or supernatural thing. It is simply the reaction of man to his environment, and more especially to his fellow man. The source of it is that same inner pulse, that love of life, that joy in growing, that faith which appears to be the soul of all being. Man is part of nature and a product of nature. In many fundamental respects, his ways are still nature's ways, and his laws still nature's laws. But there are other and even more significant ways in which man has separated himself from nature and made himself something quite different. In order to reveal this clearly, we draw a distinction between nature and man. This is a proper thing to do, provided we bear in mind that our classification is not permanent or final. We distinguish frogs from tadpoles in spite of the fact that at one stage the creature is half tadpole and half frog. We distinguish the animal from the vegetable kingdom, despite the fact that in their lower forms they cannot be distinguished. What precisely is the difference between nature and man? The difference lies in the fact that nature is apparently blind in her processes. She produces 1,000,000 eggs in order to give life to one salmon. She produces countless millions of salmon to be devoured by other fish apparently no better than salmon. Poets may take up this doctrine of evolution and dress it out in theological garments, talking about the one far-off divine event towards which the whole creation moves. But for all we can see, nature, apart from man, is just as well satisfied to move in circles and to come back exactly where she started. Nature made a whole world of complicated creatures in the steamy, lukewarm swamps of the Mesozoic era. And then, as if deciding that the pattern of a large body and a small brain was not a success, she froze them all to death with a glacial epoch, and we have nothing but the bones to tell us about them. No one understands anything about evolution until he has realized that the phrase, the survival of the fittest, does not mean the survival of the best from any human point of view. It merely means the survival of those capable of surviving in some particular environment. We consider our present civilization as fit. But if astronomical changes should cause another ice age, we should discover that our fitness depended upon our ability to live on lichens or on something we could grow by artificial light in the bowels of the earth. So much for our ancient mother, nature. But now, whether we say with the theologians that it was divine providence, or with the materialist philosophers that it was an accidental mixing of atoms, at any rate, it has come about that nature has recently produced creatures who are conscious of her process, who are able to observe and criticize it, to take up her work and carry it on their own way, for better or for worse. Whether by accident or design, there has been, on parts of our planet, such a combination of climate and soil as has brought into being a new product of nature, a heightened form of life which we call intelligence. Creation opens its eyes and beholds the work of the Creator and decides that it is good, yet not so good as it might be. Creation takes up the work of the Creator and continues it, in many respects annulling it, in other respects revising it entirely. Whether a sonnet is a better or a higher product than a spider is a question it would be futile to discuss. But this, at least, should be clear. Nature has produced an infinity of spiders, but nature never produced a sonnet, nor anything resembling it. Man, the creature of God, takes over the functions of God. This fact may shock us, or it may inspire us. To the metaphysically minded, it offers a great variety of fascinating problems. Can it be that God is in process of becoming, that there is no God until he has become in us and through us? H.G. Wells sets forth this curious idea. And then, of course, the bishops and the clergy rise up in indignation and denounce Mr. Wells as an upstart and trespasser upon their field. They have been worshiping their God for some 3,000 or 4,000 years, and know that he has been from eternity. He created the world at his will, and how shall impious man presume to rise up and criticize his product and imagine that he can improve upon it? Man, with his cheap and silly little toys, his sonnets and scientific systems, his symphony concerts, and such pale imitations of celestial harmonies. Mr. Wells, in his character of God in the making, has created a bishop of his own, and no doubt would maintain the thesis that he is a far better bishop than any created by the God of the Anglican churches. We will leave Mr. Wells' bishop to argue these problems with God's bishops, and will merely remind the reader of our warning about these metaphysical matters. You can prove anything and everything, whichever and however, all or both, and discussions of the subject are merely your enunciation of the fact that you have your private truth as you want it. It may be that there is an infinite consciousness which carries the whole process of creation in itself, and that all the seeming waste and blunders of nature can be explained from some point of view at present beyond the reach of our minds. On the other hand, it may be that consciousness is now dawning in the universe for the first time. It may be that it is an accident, a fleeting product like the morning mist on the mountain top. On the other hand, it may be that it is destined to grow and expand and take control of the entire universe, as a farmer takes control of a field for his own purposes. It may be that just as our individual fragments of intelligence communicate and merge into a family, a club, a nation, a world culture, so we shall someday grope our way toward the consciousness of other planets, or of other states of being subsiding on this planet unknown to us, or perhaps even toward the cosmic soul, the universal consciousness which we call God. But meantime, all we can say with positiveness is this: man, the created, is becoming the creator. He is taking up the world purpose. He is imposing upon it new purposes of his own. He is attempting to impose upon it a moral code, to test it and discipline it by a new standard, which he calls economy. To the present writer, this seems the most significant fact about life, the most fascinating point of view from which life can be regarded. The reader who wishes to follow it into greater detail is referred to a little book by Professor E. Ray Lankester, The Kingdom of Man, especially the opening essay with its fascinating title, Nature's Insurgent Son. In what ways have the reasoned and deliberate purposes of man revised and even supplanted the processes of nature? The ways are so many that it would be easier to mention those in which he has not done so. A modern civilized man is hardly content with anything that nature does, nor willing to accept any of nature's products. He will not eat nature's fruits. He prefers the kinds that he himself has brought into being. He is not content with the skin that nature has given him. He has made himself an infinite variety of complicated coverings. He objects to nature's habit of pouring cold water upon him, and so he has built himself houses in which he makes his own climate. He has recently taken to creating for himself houses which roll along the ground, or which fly through the air, or which swim under the surface of the sea. So he carries his private climate with him to all these places. It was nature's custom to remove her blunders and her experiments quickly from her sight. But man has decided that he loves life so well that he will preserve even the imbeciles, the lame and the halt and the blind. In a state of nature, if a man's eyes were not properly focused, he blundered into the lair of a tiger and was eaten. But civilized man despises such a method of maintaining the standard of human eyes. He creates for himself a transparent product, ground to such a curve that it corrects the focus of his eyes, and makes them as good as any other eyes. In 10,000 such ways we might name, man has rebelled against the harshness of his ancient mother, and has freed himself from her control. But still, he is the child of his mother, and so it is his way to act first, and then to realize what he has done. So it comes about that very few, even of the most highly educated man, are aware how completely the ancient ways of nature have been suppressed by her insurgent son. It is a good deal as in the various trades and professions which have developed with such amazing rapidity in modern civilization. The paper man knows how to make paper. The shoe man knows how to make shoes. The optician knows about grinding glasses, but none of these knows very much about the other specialties, and has no realization of how far the other has gone. So it comes about that in our colleges we are still teaching ancient and immutable laws of nature, which in the actual practice of men at work are as extinct and forgotten as the dodo. In all colleges, except a few which have been tainted by socialist thought, the student are solemnly learning the so-called Malthusian law, that population presses continually upon the limits of subsistence. There are always a few more people in every part of the world than that part of the world is able to maintain. At any time we increase the world's productive powers, population will increase correspondingly. So there can never be an end to human misery, and abortion, war, and famine are simply nature's eternal methods of adjusting man to his environment. Thus solemnly we are taught in the colleges, and yet 9 out of 10 of the students come from homes where the parents have discovered the modern practice of birth control. All the students are themselves finding out about it in one way or another, and will proceed when they marry to restrict themselves to 2 or 3 children. In vain will the ghost of their favorite statesman and hero, Theodore Roosevelt, be traveling up and down the land, denouncing them for the dreadful crime of race suicide. That is to say, they are presuming to use their reason to put an end to the ghastly situation revealed by the Malthusian law, overpopulation eternally recurring and checked by abortion, war, and famine. In vain will the ghost of their favorite saint and moralist, Anthony Comstock, be traveling up and down the land, putting people in jail for daring to teach to poor women what every rich woman knows, and for attempting to change the entirely man-made state of affairs whereby an intelligent and self-governing Anglo-Saxon land is being in 2 or 3 generations turned over to a slum population of Italians, Poles, Hungarians, Portuguese, French Canadians, Mexicans, and Japanese. Likewise, in every Orthodox college, the student is taught what his professors are pleased to call the law of diminishing returns of agriculture. That is to say, additional labor expanded upon a plot of land does not result in an equal increase of produce, and the increase grows less, until finally you come to a time when no matter how much labor you expend, you can get no more produce from the plot of land. All professors teach this because 50 years ago it was true, and since that time it has not occurred to any professor of political science to visit a farm. And all the while, out in the suburbs of the city where the college is located, market gardeners are practicing on an enormous scale a new system of intensive agriculture, which makes the law of diminishing returns a foolish joke. As Kropotkin shows in his book, Fields, Factories, and Workshops, the modern intensive gardener, by use of glass and the chemical test tube, has developed an entirely new science of plant raising. He is independent of climate. He makes his own climate. He is independent of the defects of the soil. He would just as soon start from nothing and make his soil upon an asphalt pavement. By doubling his capital investment, he raises not twice as much produce, but 10 times as much. If his methods were applied to the British Isles, he could raise sufficient produce on the small surface to feed the population of the entire globe. So we see that by simple and entirely harmless devices, man is in position to restrict or to increase population as he sees fit. Also, he is in position to raise food and produce the necessities of life for 100 or 1,000 times as many people as are now on the earth. But superstition ordains involuntary parenthood, and capitalism ordains that land shall be held out of use for speculation or shall be exploited for rent. And this is done in the name of nature, that old nature of the tooth and claw, whose ancient plan it is that they shall take who have the power, and they shall keep who can. That ancient nature which has been so entirely suppressed and supplanted by civilized man, and which survives only as a ghost, a skeleton to be resurrected from the tomb for the purpose of frightening the enslaved. When a predatory financier wishes a fur overcoat to protect himself from the cold, or when he hires a masseur to keep up the circulation of his blood, you do not find him troubling himself about laws of nature. Never will he mention this old scarecrow, except when he's trying to persuade the workers of the world to go on paying him tribute for the use of the natural resources of the earth. End of chapter 5. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and head over to the next video where I will be there with chapter 6.